Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook Part 2. So when I left off, I was talking about the equipment list, which is long. And part of the reason it is so long is because of the pole arms. There's a huge number of different pole arms, more than there needs to be. Only 2.5 pole arms have really sunk into the collective unconscious. The spear, the lance, and to some extent the pike. So there's way more than there really needs to be. Of the others, the only really useful ones are the halberd, which does more damage than any of the others, the ransor, and the septum, both of which cause you can disarm with those. And the ransor also allows you to unhorse, just like the lance. Other than that, you don't really need the Bec de Corbin and the Bilgisarm and the Falkard Fork. It's just too many. But a big part of preparing to play is picking which things you're going to buy and take with you into the dungeon. If you didn't remember to buy a 10-foot pole, then you don't have it. If you only bought one rope and you use that to climb down the cliff, then you don't have rope for the next cliff that you need to go down. If you don't buy enough sacks, you can't carry the treasure out. So it's a very important part of the game from the very beginning of Dungeons & Dragons. Shopping was very important, but it can be kind of tedious when you're first creating a character, waiting for them to buy all the stuff that they want to buy, especially if it's new players who aren't familiar with it. But this section here, miscellaneous equipment items, is the most important part of the whole shopping list. Now, the armor class, I'll go into that real quick. In this version, no armor is armor class 10, leather armor is armor class 8, chainmail is armor class 5, plate mail is armor class 3, and plate mail plus shield is armor class 2. There was this thing called armor class adjustment, that different weapons had different bonuses or minuses against different kinds of armor. And if you used this, it made a huge difference which weapon you used. But hardly anybody ever used this when this was new. In the Dragon, there was a wheel device that allowed you to quickly compute these. And so that was very handy, and people who used that say that it worked really good. I tried using it once, and it was pretty good. One thing that was different about this edition is weapons did different damage against creatures that were bigger than a human than they did against man-sized or smaller. Most of them did more damage against the larger creatures. Some of them did less. Another thing that's different is the missile weapons. Some of them you could fire more than once in the same round, especially bows. You could fire twice a round. Heavy crossbows you could only fire once every other round, and darts you could throw 3 of them around. You couldn't throw them very far. They didn't do much damage, but if you're a magic user, dart is one of the things you could have. So after you cast your one spell, it was very handy to just throw darts, and that would allow you to help in combat a little bit. Now, in the player's handbook here, it has a whole section here on hirelings. It's assumed that first level players are going to hire hirelings. The normal party size in those days was a minimum of 10 characters. So if you didn't have enough players, you would need to hire men-at-arms to beef up your numbers. But when you got to be higher level, around level 3, the men-at-arms started getting killed off too often, and so nobody would want to work for you anymore. So then you would hire a henchman. A henchman was a character with a class. They start off at first level, and you would kind of protect them, but you'd have them around to help. And eventually, when your character got killed, it would be your next character. Henchmen were very useful, so there were limits on how many you could have based on your charisma. Now the spells, the spells had levels. There were 7 levels of spells, with 12. The clerics had 12 first level spells and 10 7th level spells. The druids had a different list than the clerics. Some spells were in common. For instance, Cure Light Wounds was a 2nd level spell for druids and a 1st level spell for clerics. But other spells were unique to the druids, like Heat Metal, which only druids could do, and Fairy Fire. Magic users had more spells than anybody. They had 9 levels of spells, including 30 first level spells and 12 9th level spells. So they were the best at doing magic, but illusionists had a different list than magic users. Some of the spells they had in common. For instance, Phantasmal Force was a 1st level illusionist spell, but a 3rd level magic user spell. But other spells were unique to illusionists, like Improved Phantasmal Force, Spectral Force, Improved Invisibility, Chaos. These were all things that only illusionists could do. Now, the spells were laid out by class and by level. So first you have the cleric 1st level spells all together here, and then you have the cleric 2nd level spells. This was really handy when you're playing. If you're playing a spellcaster, you just open it up to the pages that your class can do, and here are your spells listed by level. So you can see the 1st level spells, then the 2nd level spells, then the 3rd level, and so forth. So that was very handy. Only problem with that is, get to it, sometimes the spell description would say, except as noticed above, the spell's the same as the cleric spell, Dispel Magic. So you'd have to look it up in 2 places. That was a problem, but for the most part, this was very handy, having all your spells together for your class. Now, one of the things about high-level illusionists is they only had 5 7th level spells. That's not very many, but they could take, instead of memorizing 1 7th level spell, they can memorize 4 1st level magic user spells from this list of the most useful ones. This is kind of a prelude to Rary's Mnemonic Enchanter, which appeared later. So after the spells, there's a whole bunch of pages on how to play. And this doesn't include any of the information that's for the Dungeon Master. So it doesn't tell you how to know if you hit. That's something the Dungeon Master would know. It's just information for the players. Now, in the appendices, the first one was psionics. Now, your chances of psionics is really small, like 1 or 2%. And it's kind of overpowered, but, you know, the chances of you having it are very small. There was one player who would always play an illusionist with psionics, and so I suspect there was some cheating involved in his making that psionics roll. But chances of having it are very small, and the psionic monsters are really powerful, especially if you're 1st level. So if you're a 1st level psionist, it's with a psionic, and you use your psionics, you're going to attract the attention of a psionic monster who will eat you. Now, in the Dragon, there was a psionics class, which I thought was pretty good. It was a better way to do it, but I liked 1st edition psionics better than 2nd edition. even though it had some problems with it. There was also the Bard class, the very first prestige class. Now, in order to be a Bard, you had to become a fighter and work your way up to 5th level, and then become a 1st level thief and work your way up to 6th level. And then, sometime after reaching 6th level thief, then you could become a Bard. It was a very powerful class because you had 5 levels of fighter hit points, plus 3 or 4 levels of thief hit points, plus a bunch of Bard hit points. Their spells were druid spells. They had some bardic abilities, including Charm Person. They would know some extra languages. They had a chance of knowing legendary stuff. It was a really powerful class, but I hardly ever saw it because people didn't want to work their way up. But for a high-level dungeon like the GDQ series, this would be an awesome class to play in that. The alignment is a 9-point alignment. After that, it had this section on the planes, which I thought this was really cool at the time. So I was really interested in extraplanar adventures until in 2nd edition, a particular DM who ran me around in Sigil for Planescape cured me of my interest in the planes. So that is the 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook.